Thank you for calling. Please leave a message.
They build it, that's where I'm going to go.
By why, I mean what's your purpose? If you're going to live to be in 2020, you might as well play to be in 2020.
We are one global community.
The digital revolution has just begun.
Alister, welcome to the Supercharged Entrepreneur Podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
That's lovely to have you. Lovely to have you. I'm going to start with the introduction, Alister, if that's okay, because I've prepared it, which is a bit of a change for me. But I feel like you're at the level where I feel you deserve a really good introduction. So I know early in your career you worked at Kimberly-Clark, where you were managing some of the UK's best loved brands, from Kleenex to Huggies to Andrex. You then moved on to spend 10 years at Microsoft, rising to become the company's first head of digital marketing strategy. You are accredited with winning a series of awards, notably picking up the Digital Marketing Personality of the Year twice in 2013 and 2019. And I think today you're best known as a writer, trainer, consultant, and keynote speaker who specializes in helping audiences understand and positively embrace technological change to create better experiences for their customers. I think you are also known as the Digital Optimist. So I'd like to start there, if that's okay, Alister. What is a digital optimist?
Well, I think, that's a good place to start. It's a daft thing, isn't it? It's a phrase that someone actually said to me. He said, "Oh, you're a digital optimist." I'm like, oh, I'll have that. And it is, I think there is a lot of very healthy cynicism about technology, about the direction that the world is going in, and about what it does to people. And this is, let's be under no illusions, this is a live experiment where we are all the guinea pigs. Nobody knows what long-term benefits or harm a lot of the changes that we're all going through will have on us. And indeed, if humans can even cope with this degree of turmoil and regular transformation. But so I am an optimist about that thing. I do believe that, generally speaking, humans have a remarkable ability to sort the wheat from the chaff and actually to, ultimately to land on something that is beneficial for the species as a whole. It's just kind of grand topic, isn't it, to start with?
Very grand.
But, but I think I'm optimistic about the direction that technology will take us, because I think we kind of self-correct. But I'm also, within that optimism label is a really sort of battle-scarred realism about the fact that a lot of technology, a lot of new things that come along are frankly not necessary, not beneficial, and you're wasting your time with them. So for somebody who has built a lot, certainly the last few decades of their career, on riding this technological wave, I'm probably the first person to say, really, do you need to do that? What does the customer want that? What's the problem you're solving here? And I think that's sort of a healthy balance to have, is to believe that yes, we can do better, we can have a positive future for the planet and the species as a whole, but also let's keep our eyes open to what really matters and try and keep ourselves grounded.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs and business leaders. So how is technology changing the world of business, Alister?
Technology and business, technology and the arts, technology and everything, they're kind of inseparable, because it has such a powerful effect on the way that we live our lives. The behaviours we learn, the expectations that we develop, everything is formed by what technology is doing to us. And you just cannot separate the two. And business has probably been affected as much as anything, because business is about providing a service or a product, to create a transaction and so on. And if technology allows you to do that in new ways, better ways, and your competitors see a new way of doing it, it's actually the driving force for so much of what we see in the world. And technology is such a broad, amorphous concept, isn't it? What is it? But actually, it's kind of anything that's got some sort of electricity going into it, and any sort of intelligence, whether it's artificial or human supported, that allows things to happen in a new way. And of course, we always think of our phones and our computers and the internet and stuff like that. But it's everything that we live through. The fact that you can get a delivery of a product in an hour if you're in the right location, or you can talk to the walls and the answer will come back to you. That changes businesses that have nothing to do with deliveries and nothing to do with voice recognition, because the expectation is built And that becomes the framework on which everything else is judged for the future. So it has an effect on every business, whether you're running a florist on a high street or, the world's largest waste disposal company. It really doesn't matter. You have to be thinking about this and thinking about what it's doing to people first, and then how you should be using it to continue to serve them better in the future.
Yeah, I'd really like to explore the changes and the effects it's had on individuals, definitely later in the chat, Alistair. But just going back to businesses, what are the trends that you're seeing right now that business owners should be aware of in terms of new technologies?
Well, I think the big one, and I mean, everyone's got COVID fatigue, haven't they? And in a way, that's a nice problem to have because it means we're maybe coming out the back end of this thing. But the truth is, businesses really need to be acutely aware of the changes and the behaviours that their customers have learned in the last few months, and then indeed a year now, because we've learned that we can work from home. There's very obvious things: working from home, having a video chat, recording stuff like this, remotely. We can do all of these things. And there's various studies, but generally speaking, in most sectors, we've kind of leapt forward what would normally, under a natural cycle, have taken 3 to 4 years. So we've knocked 3 or 4 years off of the adoption cycle for some technology changes. Now, if your customers have been at home and they've learned that, I don't know, whatever it is, they can order stuff and it gets delivered, they can source solutions to answers in different ways, they can use technology to just live their lives differently, they come back to work or they continue working in a different way. Their mindset has been changed. And I think that's hugely important, that we look at those behaviors and we think about, well, okay, what does this change for my business? Because generally speaking, we as consumers, we can change quite quickly, can't we? I can choose to get Netflix and start watching streaming or something I have to get my wife's permission. But beyond that, I can pretty much decide what I want to do with my life. But if I want to put Netflix into a business, we have to have 17 meetings, 16 committees, review cycle, get the budget. It takes forever. So businesses do always lag real people. And so when you've got people who have gone and lived their lives in remarkably different ways, and they come back into the workplace, their expectations have moved on. Your business needs to as well. So think very carefully about that. And what do you need to change? Or even if it's maybe thinking about your customers, what are your customers' expectations now? They will be very different in many sectors to where they were a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the questions I'd love to explore next with you, Alistair, is how can a business owner go about asking that question? How do we find out and explore how our individual markets have changed?
It's a tricky one because, I mean, the classic marketeer's response would be, well, you need to do some market research. You need to talk to your customers, get some data. Let's do some quant and some qual and spend some money on this. Let's get some grown-ups to analyse the data and come up with some clever recommendations for us. But the problem with a lot of this is that the world moves so quickly and technology changes our behaviours in real time. And people don't know what they kind of don't know. People won't articulate to you, oh, my expectation is that this should now happen in my life. And so as businesses, we have to kind of become, develop abilities to sort of look at people almost like David Attenborough would look at a monkey or something and really understand, why are they behaving that way? Why are people doing this? What does this mean? And then overlaying on that, this knowledge that we have of our business, our sector, and then coming up with a solution to a problem. I mean, there's a study that I often talk about in my talks that it asked drivers, said, well, what sort of things would you like to be able to do whilst driving? And, I don't know, what would you say? If I asked you that question, what sort of things would you like to be able to do whilst driving?
Watch Netflix.
Watch Netflix. Yeah, you've got to come up with some ideas. Well, it'd be nice to do that and so on. You don't really sort of think about it. Now, I'm not sure if anyone's listening, watching Netflix and driving is probably not advisable. No. Almost certainly illegal.
Yeah.
But when they ran this, they asked this question. But the sort of answers they get from people are like, well, I don't really know. And they say things like Netflix, or they come up with, I would like to be able to talk to people on the phone. But when you prompt people and you say, would you like to be able to find nearby parking spaces easily? 61% of people say, yeah, I'd like that. But they wouldn't have thought of that because it doesn't exist. And And it's the same, there are other things on there. There was 52% of people, I'm slightly baffled by this one, but 52% of people said they'd like to be able to pay for fuel in advance, which is an interesting concept. But yeah, I suppose if you're prompted with that idea, you could pay for fuel in advance. So I could say, right, I'm coming down the road, there's a garage there, and I could talk to some device and it would sort of automatically say, you can load 50 pounds of fuel into your car at pump number 3. That would be cool, wouldn't it? You could pull in, fuel up, drive straight off. No interactions whatsoever. But no one would say that if you ask them just the question. And this is the problem that entrepreneurs have with their businesses. If you go and talk to your customers, say, well, what more do you need? What can I do for you? They won't know. You have to think about what technology can do. You have to look at their behaviors and you have to come up with the ideas and then prompt them with the ideas about things that are feasible, possible, and see what they bite at. What bait do they take? And that's where you'll get the ideas from for how you take your business forwards, because technology just changes so quickly. But when we're offered that ability to, pay for fuel in advance, we're like, yeah, I'd like that. More than half of people would like it. Build that service and boom, you've got, a virtually guaranteed way of getting people to pull into your fuel station versus your competitors. But no one's done it yet.
Yeah.
At least not in the UK.
No, not yet. No. I think that's really interesting, Alistair. And it brings me back to a conversation I had with Andrew Grill, who's the practical futurist.
I know Andrew.
Yeah, he's a great guy, a really good guy. And we talked about this this way of thinking, this digital curiosity. And it kind of brings me back to that way of thinking. And it also gets me thinking about the balance that I think leaders have to strike between understanding or being open to new technologies and sort of that more traditional thought leadership piece. Because basically what a thought leadership is commenting, having a thought on something that's happening or evolving in the world. And I think for me, I don't know if you'd agree, Alistair, but it's taking a more sort of hands-on approach to thought leadership, really sort of saying, let's go beyond the thinking and into the doing.
Yeah, I've always had an issue, with the words thought leadership. I get what it's about, and I work with lots of clients and lots of businesses around the world that do thought leadership, and their customers want that. But I have a bit of a philosophical issue with the idea of being a thought leader. It's like, who put you in charge of all the thinking? That's a bit grand of you, isn't it? Why do you control this thing? So I don't think it is about thought leadership. I think it's about having original ideas, original thoughts, and being prepared to join a conversation with other like-minded people so that together we can come up with an idea that would work for you. So that's kind of my natural resistance to thought leadership. But you're right. It's we go through various cycles. Everyone says they want thought leadership, but the reality is most people in business, they just want to know, well, how do I get this to fit with that and make these things work? I want to put out this fire and move on to the next problem. So there is a need for, and this is what Andrew's great at, is bringing it down to the practical level as to what actually can I do today that makes sense. And the other great danger with a lot of futurism is that you kind of get obsessed by the shiny object, and you're sort of dead set on, right, okay, we're going to do a virtual reality thing, and you might win a prize or get mentioned in the annual meeting or something if you do this amazing virtual reality thing. But at the end of the day, you should only be doing those things if that is the most effective and efficient way of solving the problem that you're trying to solve. And it's very rarely actually that the shiny object is the optimal way of doing it. There's always many, many ways of solving a problem. And I think far too many, particularly marketeers, sorry to sort of throw this at my beloved professionals, a lot of marketeers do get caught up in their headlights and they think, oh, well, look, we've got to do this. Yeah. This cool, funky thing, and it's going to be cool, and it's going to be amazing, and we get to use our crayons, and it's good. But really, how else could you solve this problem? And I bet there's a ton of easier ways that are proven that you probably got the skill set to do well. And you might not have such a good story to tell your mum next time you see her, but it's going to be doing the business, it's doing the job.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you, Alistair, help guide the business owner, the business leader, to focus on which shiny thing to pay attention to and move forward with?
It's a great question, and I've done the two as well. I've 20 years in the corporate world, lots of marketing, and nearly a decade now doing what I do today, talking at events and helping organisations with training and workshops. So I've seen both sides of this. It always comes back to the customer. If they made a video of the pain that they're feeling right now, what would they be saying? What would they be doing? How many, be pointing their finger at you, complaining about this thing? That's what we need to fix. And the only way you're going to come up with good, particularly digital marketing or, newfangled marketing ways of solving that problem is by having a good broad-based understanding of what is available, right? And then going right back to the customer and saying, okay, what is of the available choices I have, what's the optimal way of solving this problem? And you know what? If it's a good old-fashioned direct mail is the most efficient way of doing it, crack on. You're the best marketeer I'll ever meet. And, that if that's what's right for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. It's 100%. Whatever the customer wants, that's where we go. And I think you're absolutely right. And my message, I'm sure you agree with this, for Alistair, for business owners and business leaders, if you haven't got somebody that's acting as an advocate for your customer within your organization, then I think you're missing a huge opportunity, because fundamentally the customers drive the growth of your business, and the marketing function is there to listen and understand the customer.
It's true. Marketers have rightly been, are the conscience of the customer. They should know that. I think sales has a huge responsibility in that today as well. And it's wrong to put all of that weight on the marketeers. Sales and marketing should be working much more in parallel these days than the old sort of tag team thing where it's like, right, we'll get the leads and then we'll toss them over the fence to sales and they'll follow them through. Leads can come from anywhere today. That's the magic of it. We can all build, it's particularly in B2B, we can all build business relationships through all of these amazing resources that the technology has given us. But you've got to be the conscience of the customer. You've got to constantly say to yourself, hang on, I'm not here to make me look good. I'm here to make them look good. How do I do that best?
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Just shifting focus back to the technology for a second and the psychology behind the way we approach new technologies. What's your perspective on how technology has impacted us on a personal level?
There's a word that I use often. It's a made-up word called hyperconvenienced. And I was trying to find a word that could describe what's happened to us as human beings. And this is kind of as good as I've got to. Hyperconvenience, which means we are convenienced, in a sort of a hyper way, So we're so convenienced in our lives. We take everything for granted. We don't stop to appreciate the miracle of anything. I mentioned things like same day delivery. If you think back, I can vaguely remember this. I don't know if you can, Phil. The first time I ordered something online for next day delivery, and I'm fairly sure it was Amazon, because that's how predictable I am, and it was probably a CD or a book or something, back in the day. And I remember ordering in a next day delivery. Oh, that's cool. And I really acutely remember that sense of awe I had when it arrived the next day, and there was this guy on the doorstep with my package. I couldn't get my head around, how is that? That is amazing. They've taken my order, they've processed the payment, they've processed it, they've located the stock, they've picked the stock, they've packed the stock, they've distributed. How's that even happen? And I was amazed for about 3 minutes. and then it was just, all right, it's next day delivery nowadays. That's it. And instantly, I, like everybody else, shifted my expectation. I became more convenienced. Yeah. And if I throw myself forward, it's a good few years, isn't it? We've had next day delivery for a long time, of course. But now, I won't shop somewhere if I'm in a hurry. I'm reasonable. But if it's not next day delivery, I'm not interested. If I've got to pay for delivery, hang on, what? I'm not paying for delivery. And in fact, if I'm in a big city, I do expect delivery within an hour, even 30 minutes with Amazon Prime now. I've just grown accustomed to that. And now, this rather rambling story about next day delivery doesn't mean, if you're a plumbing supplies company or whatever it is, you have to do next day delivery. Of course it doesn't. But you have to look at your competitive set, and you have to understand the consideration set that your customers have. If somebody else is giving them next day delivery and they know that thing exists, you have a duty to examine that and say, is that something we should supply, and could we supply it, and how do we do that? Yeah. What it does mean, though, for every business is that because we're a hyper-convenienced, our expectations rise all the time. Our expectations are that we should get the best level of service we've ever found in our lives, right? So if somebody does 5-minute delivery. Oh, 5-day delivery. Come on, guys, keep up. And so my expectation is as good as it's got. So if I bought from you last year and I come back this year and everything's the same, that's when things start to feel wrong. So that's when it starts to feel like, hang on, everything else around me is getting better, but you've stood still. So even simple things like if a customer needs to raise a purchase order or get an invoice or raise some paperwork or contact your call center, it should be easier today than it was a year ago. Everything should be, because if it isn't, it looks like you're going backwards. So that's the message. Is people are hyper convenienced, whatever that word means. They just expect it to be better all the time because everything in the world is getting better. And if you're not, you're getting worse.
Yeah. I reflect back actually to some of the significant digital transformation projects that have sprung out of nowhere in the last 12 months. A lot of B2B companies have been picking up the phone to us, and companies like us going, how do we get online? And what's been fascinating is sort of my initial reaction was, it's fine, we'll do it. And as the months started to go by, I think there was a very, very clear reaction for me to go, I think that's the wrong pushback. I think the right pushback is, why are you online? And is it a short-term thing for COVID, or is it a long-term actual behavioral change that you're anticipating? And I think there's merits in doing it for both. Forgive me, there's absolute merits both ways.
It's entirely forgivable that an organisation hasn't done things like building a effective mobile website, or figuring out how to do home deliveries or e-commerce, whatever it is that they've suddenly realised in the last year is actually something their customers would really quite like. I love this. I love the fact that when we went into the first lockdown here in the UK, pubs and bars, they couldn't operate, but they had all this beer, and they started doing click and collect.
Yeah,
and it was pretty crude. Send an email and Bob will pour some beer and you can come pick it up later on this evening. But they quickly also then realised, hang on, we could do meals, so you could pick up a meal while you're here. And suddenly I'm in a little village and we got 4 pubs, and very fortunate, and they were all doing home delivery food. They'd never offered home delivery before. It was an amazing thing, and it makes you sort of think, why was this never an option? I appreciate there's a business model, but it is possible. Maybe it could have been possible, and with 4 pubs competing for attention, surely one of them would have had the idea before. So I completely forgive organisations for not having done the changes that suddenly they're like deer in the headlights, and they realise, oh my goodness, we have no choice. We have to do it. But you're right, when it comes time to do it, don't just think, right, I'm going to do this thing and that solves all the problems. No, it doesn't. You need to think more deeply about your business and say, okay, so if I introduce this change, what other expectations are there that are still unmet? And maybe, just maybe, while I'm in this mode of positive change and momentum for my business, I could do something else that I don't yet have to do, but would probably be a really useful thing for my business. And that's where you start to actually get competitive advantage rather than just business survival, which is the mode that many people have been in for the last few months. Yeah,
and it's completely excusable. We've all been in survival mode for the last 12 months, so we have to respect that, I guess, to some extent, Alistair, don't we? So, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about how businesses can develop long-term thinking, and more specifically, how do we work with the newer, younger generations of aspiring and upcoming leaders, the Gen Zs and maybe even the Gen Alphas, the last sort of 8 to 10 years? What are your thoughts on that, Alistair? What do we need to be aware of now as business leaders?
I think there are no hard generational divides, but there are commonalities in the way that certain age groups live their lives and the expectations that they've built up. The first thing I would say is that if you are in a business and you don't understand how younger groups, generally speaking, it'll be younger people, not older, who are moving more quickly than you. If you don't understand how they're thinking, how they're behaving, then you've got to get them into your organization. You've got to find a way to spend more time with them and understand how they think. And that may be an investment in, say, market research or focus groups, or just developing a new product service that would somehow appeal to those people more than your more traditional offerings. Or it might be being really proactive around apprenticeships and bringing people into your organization at a young age. You need that fresh blood. It's one of the reasons why I got out of the corporate world. I never wanted to be the oldest marketeer in the building. And it's a young woman's game. It really is quite it's a fast, dynamic, changing thing. And you're constantly dealing with new cultures and new approaches. And yet when you're an entrepreneur, you might, you hope if you've got a good business, you're going to go on for decades. You're going to keep going for a long time. But your business has to move with the times. It may not need to move as dramatically as some people would have you believe. They'll be saying, "Oh, Gen Alpha's doing this, and you need to be doing a TikTok dance, or whatever." And it's that's rarely the truth. There may be some learning you can get out of it, but there are many more things that you do already that are relevant to those people than things you're missing because you're not cool and groovy. And that just shows you how incredibly old I am that I just used the words cool and groovy. So it is really difficult to keep up with these with the younger generations. But it's no different. Honestly, it's no different to what, I don't know, somebody in the 60s or the 50s was dealing with when they were trying to make sense of these young kids with their Brill-creamed hair and all of the craziness that was going on then. It's just an evolution of youth culture. What is different is the capability with technology, the appetite for technology, and to some degree the brain elasticity that's developed through regular multitasking that goes on, because you are exposed to so much stimulus as a younger person now than I was, going to library to pick up a book. Now you've got however many billions of different channels that you can look at any one moment in the comfort of your bedroom. So it is very different. They do think differently. They have different approaches to things. But what they don't have, and this isn't to pick on the younger people, but they don't have the wisdom of ages, which has always been a valuable thing, the maturity to know what should work and what won't work. And that does come from having a few grey hairs like I've got. So you need that mix of the two, I think, is a really nice thing. And the day that we're comfortable to do that, to sit down, to have the humility to admit our ignorance. I've got a teenage son doing A-levels and an 11-year-old daughter, and they make me look like a dinosaur, even though I'm probably the most technologically advanced person that most people know. They make me look like a dinosaur. I don't pretend to know as much about them, but I do have the humility to be fascinated by how they think and how they behave, and try to figure out, okay, what does that mean for my business and my clients' businesses? If you can do that, then you might just extract some meaning. But don't forget, there is great value in the wisdom of ages of, having been around the block a few times and having the knowledge to pick the right choices for the customers rather than whatever just feels like the coolest, funkiest thing going on at the moment. And there's another badly dated reference that I've just made.
It was a lovely reference, and it was a lovely reference, Alistair. I think, one of the things that I think I've been exploring recently, Alistair, is empathy. And I think the egotism of my youth has been tempered by my desire to be more empathetic in my older age. It's driven by a desire to connect with people, to collaborate better, and to bring the best out of people on my team or the teams that I work with. And it brings me on to one of my final questions, really, about business leaders, which is the importance of mindset and creating or cultivating a mindset that embraces change. And I wonder what your thoughts were on that, Alistair.
Empathy is a lovely word, and I'm thankful. We've got we've just had International Women's Day. We've got Black Lives Matter. We've got various sort of big movements that hopefully are finally turning the tide on some of the outdated attitudes that persist in many parts of the world. But you've got to have that ability to sort of suspend your ego, suspend your sense of, I know everything, or what got me here is my power. And actually just be honest that in a world that moves as quickly as it does, it is extremely unlikely that you've got all the answers to what is needed tomorrow. It really is. And you're going to find those answers through working with a diversity of people, a diversity of perspectives, and repeatedly having the humility to say, I don't know what that is. Can you explain it? And what does that mean? And I had a moment many years ago when I first joined Microsoft. I you said in the intro, I was at Kimberly Clark's. I was looking after Andrex puppies, and and of course the toilet tissue that goes with it, and I'm doing good old fashioned consumer marketing. And in those worlds, to be honest, we all know how many orifices the average person has. Things don't really change that much from one year to the next. So it's a relatively predictable business as to how much you're going to sell. The only real changes are the competitive set. Is your market share going to be bigger or smaller? And when I went to Microsoft, here's a business with absolutely no long-term track record, a completely unknown future, creating products today for needs that consumers don't even have. And that's the same, in any sort of technology industry. And I was in a meeting and they were banging on about, it was APIs. They were talking about APIs. And I was sort of writing this stuff down. And what I'd do is I'd go home in the evening and I'd spend hours going through my notes trying to make sense of all of the things that people had said to me during the day. And I thought, and it finally hit me. I can't go on like this. I'm exhausted. What's an API? And I said it in the meeting and I said, what's an API? And everyone looked at me a bit funny. It's like, oh, don't you know what API is? And someone said, oh, it's an application what does it stand for? And then there was a bit of a debate. And actually, I realised half the people in the room hadn't got a clue what it was either. And eventually, we all sort of knew what it was, or they did. I soon did. They could sort of explain roughly what it did, but they didn't really have a dictionary definition of it. They didn't know what the letters stood for. And that was the moment in my career when I came to terms with the fact that it's okay to admit you don't know. It's okay to sort of say, I must have missed a memo. What is that thing? And then actually find out if we all know, because if we don't all know, then actually that's a really good conversation to have if we're talking about APIs. But also it's just so much more efficient than sort of nodding and playing dumb and then yes, and going on making the same bad business decisions because you didn't invest the time to find out what that thing is. And that's really crucial. You've got to have a lot of humility today.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one because leaders used to be leaders because of what they knew, because what they've done to get them to where they are. And of course, brilliant leaders are still hugely valuable, but what they know is less valuable today than it was in the past. It's their ability to make sense of the present and to identify things for the future and to steer us towards those things. That's what real leaders and great entrepreneurs are wonderful at doing. And it is a very different business journey than say I went through in my younger years for somebody who's coming through the ranks today. So yeah, empathy is a lovely word.
I think your time at Microsoft is a lovely metaphor for the ever-changing world we live in and for the need to be constantly reinventing, reassessing your abilities, reinventing yourself, and reassessing your abilities. I'd love to hear, Alistair, what your 3 top lessons you learned from your time at Microsoft. What did you take away from your time there?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I've given you one already, so I've got to repeat that because it is my sort of top thing. Is the world moves very, very fast, and you've got to have a hunger and a desire to make sense of it, and you've got to be prepared to put in the legwork to discover what's new, so that you're making the right decisions, for your customers. You've also you've got to have a really important lesson I learned and has stood me in great stead, and I'm so pleased that many other people are now getting it, is having a work-life balance is so important. It's a word, we throw work-life balance like it's suddenly a thing. And everybody has to work out what that means for them, their lives, their family, their friends, and their passions in life. And Microsoft was wonderful at that, because right on day one, my boss said, look, I don't care really where you work or how you work. I mean, don't do anything illegal, but just this, I'm going to set you some targets and you need to hit those targets. As long as you do, we're going to be happy. And he said, there'll be times when your nose is at the grindstone, it's going to really hurt. You're going to be burning because it's going to be really, really hard. There will be many other times when it just goes a bit quiet and there's nothing much happening. And back then my son had just been born, and I said, he said, look, if the sun's shining, go and play in the garden with your son. It really doesn't matter. There's no point sitting at your computer waiting for the next email. So that whole work-life balance, it's a great business performance is not about working all the hours. It's about taking your holidays. It's about having that reflective time, about thinking about what you want to achieve. And the best people I met the best marketeers especially, are fantastically lazy. They do as little as possible to achieve their business goals and not one thing more. And you have to admire them for that. You know, they really are smart. They know what works. They do those things and then they go home or they go to the pub or whatever makes them happy. And that's really important. So I don't know if I gave you 3 answers there, but I think actually the other thing I will say is I've learned actually, and this is probably not great comfort to any of your listeners in the corporate world, I've learned infinitely more since leaving Microsoft than I did while I was inside the corporate world. A bit of hustle, a bit of having to, you know, stand up on my own hind legs and make it work, having to have the courage to go into the unknown, to build a business with an uncertain future, you know. That stuff I would never have learned in the corporate world because there was too much protection, too many comfort blankets around me. And it's made me, I think, a much better marketeer and I think a better human being as well. So if anyone's out there thinking in the corporate world, you know, oh, should I stick with this? If it's your thing, stick with it. It's a magical thing. I had a great time. But also if there's something inside you burning that says, I want to do my thing, then, you know, think really hard about it and think about what more you'll get out of it. It's not always about the paycheck. In fact, it very rarely often isn't.
It's never about the paycheck.
But it is about having the life that you want to live.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Alistair. And I'd encourage anybody, whether you're on the corporate ladder or whether you're a budding or current entrepreneur, to take those benefits of being an entrepreneur. It really is about taking control of your life. And there's a lot more work-life balance, I think, being an entrepreneur than there is being in the corporate world. But that's just me. I think you work twice as hard, but you have the ability
there can be. I mean, I honestly, I work harder now.
Yeah.
But because it's my thing, it doesn't feel like work.
No.
So, you know, on balance, there's not one day, because I could, you know, I'm okay. I could lie in bed every day if I wanted to. I never do.
Yeah.
I get up, the alarm goes, I'm on it. I want to change the world. I want to help some businesses. I want to make a difference. And that's the stuff that lights up my day. So I'll keep doing it for as long as it does.
Alistair, what's your top tip for entrepreneurs in 2021?
Be curious, keep looking at how the world's changing. We have gone through incredible turmoil. We will come out of it. And we have demonstrated as either individuals or as populations or societies an incredible capacity for change, an incredible capacity to, when we have to adapt the way that we operate and to, you know, to work from home or to, you know, buy bread from the van because it's only there one day a week, whatever it is. That level of ability to change should be your cue to introduce changes to your business. If they're the right changes, people will lap them up and they will walk towards you because of what you're doing. So, you know, stay curious and have the courage to make some positive changes that will benefit your customers. Go for it.
Brilliant. Finally, Alistair, how can people get in touch with you if they'd like to engage with what you do?
You can find me online, although you never will because I have a ridiculously spelled name. It's Allister.live, which is ALLISTER.live. Or you can find me at alisterspeaks.com. Basically, if you can vaguely spell Allister Frost, chances are you'll find me online somewhere. And it's always good to hear from people.
Brilliant. Alistair, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for being part of the Supercharged Entrepreneur podcast.
Thank you.
I wish you very well.